So thank you so much, Glenn, for allowing me the opportunity to be able to spend a few moments with you, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Okay. Also, Congresswoman Fallin, a couple of quick introductions. We have the chair of our State Regents Board with us here today, Chairman Jody Parker from Tulsa. Welcome, Regent Parker. And one of our panelists this afternoon, the editorial chief for the Oklahoma, Mr. Ed Kelly. Ed, thank you for your Let's go right into questions from our group. We will entertain questions, and Congresswoman Fallin will answer your questions you pose. First, from Northwestern Oklahoma State University, Dr. Janet Cunningham.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fallin, for being here today and joining us. My question has to do with funding. That's a pretty hot topic for most of us. For the past 2 years, the governor and legislative leadership have really differentiated funding for higher education from some of the other state agencies. In 2009, we actually received a 3% increase when many state agencies received a 7% cut. And even in 2010, our cut or our reduction was only 1.7%. So I think clearly the current governor and the legislative leadership have made higher education funding a top priority. My question to you is, will higher education funding receive that same type of top priority in your administration's budget process?
Yes. My staff has told me when someone asks you a question and you just absolutely support it, just say yes. You know, typically I like to expand a little bit on that, but yes, absolutely. And I am proud that both the House and Senate and the governor, in a bipartisan way, made higher education a priority, as you mentioned, for the last couple of years. And there still will be challenges going forward, but as I mentioned about how important having an educated workforce will be to the growth of Oklahoma, to not only job retention, but job attraction, and to the various industries. I've been talking a lot to the aerospace industry. They keep telling me, we need engineers, Mary. We need engineers in our state. And having the type of skilled, educated workforce to meet the needs of the future of so many of our important industries, whether it is aviation, aerospace, whether it's the energy sector, the financial sector, small businesses, it's going to be crucial that we continue to keep our children in college and universities, if at all possible, raise our graduation rates. I know we're behind the national average, but you've made some improvement, Chancellor, over the last couple of years in raising the number of college graduates that we have, and I'm proud of Oklahoma, and that will continue to be a goal of mine, is to continue to get more graduates, keep our children in college, and certainly to work towards funding higher education at the levels it needs to be successful.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fallin. Next question, Dr. Don Betts, Northeastern State University, campuses in Alabama, and Muskogee.
I remember when you was at UCO. That's how far back we go.
Wonderful to see you today. Thank you very much for joining us. You've already answered part of the question I wanted to ask, which had to do with the HOPE initiative for 744. But a follow-up question for us would be, if it did pass, how would you address this issue, particularly in terms of higher education?
Well, and that's going to be a huge challenge for all of us if it does pass. And like I say, I'm for improving education and doing all that we can to raise the standards in education. But of course, that money for 744 does not come with any reform efforts for education, as we all know. No funding source, too. So it's estimated it's going to cost anywhere from the low of $850 million to the high of, I've heard, up to $1.2 billion. I think it's the latest figure I heard. So that's a huge portion of our state budget at a time when we may already have possibly $1 billion shortfall. So if you take the $1 billion shortfall that we have, the $1 billion for the HOPE initiative, and you take $2 billion out of the state budget, when we have a $6.7 billion budget, you see the numbers and the challenges that we would have in government itself. But if it should pass, I'll know November 3rd, I'll know November 2nd, and I'm ready to work with our legislators, work with people that I believe are innovative within the state of Oklahoma, work with our different institutions to do what we need to do to first of all, set our priorities in the state, which would be education and higher ed, and that certainly to maintain and do what we need to do for law enforcement, corrections, roads and bridges, and healthcare service, our top priorities of the state. But we're going to have to make some very tough decisions in that, and that's why I mentioned making government more efficient, more effective. There'll be a lot of changes that will have to be made in government itself, and there'll be pretty rough decisions. You know, one of the things, I'll tell you a couple of things I've done in the past. One is when I was chairman of the Tourism Commission for 12 years, I worked towards passing legislation with the legislature to allow the state of Oklahoma to have public-private partnerships with our state lodges. And so we let bids on Lake Texoma. We had some Oklahoma companies, Chaparral and Chesapeake, that are now spending, they tell me, maybe by the time they finish the project, $1 billion in southern Oklahoma at that resort, which once again will go into being paid in property taxes, which will help the state of Oklahoma, and certainly education will generate revenue throughout southern Oklahoma. But looking at ways that we can build public-private partnerships is a great example. I'm going to look at, I'm going to do this anyway, but I'm going to look at all the assets of our states. Our state, we have unproductive assets in buildings and fleets that we may not be utilizing. Looking at our contracts, how we can create more cost reduction in contracts, services that we get, and even looking at the management of our investments in the state. When you were Speaker of the House, you remember all the different investment pools of money, whether it's the School Land Commission, whether it's the State Insurance Fund, and there are billions, I don't know where they're at today, but they have it in the $1 billion range. And then you have state employees pension system, you have a teachers pension system, you have other systems, but lots of money managers that are out there that we're paying big sums of money to manage money. Maybe there's some cost efficiencies in that of just managing money in the state of Oklahoma. So looking at efficiency in government itself, limiting duplication of waste, looking at unused, unproductive assets of the states, public-private partnerships, ways that we can make things more cost efficient, will be some of the ideas I'll be looking at. And hitting the ground running November 4th. Because I want to make sure we're working before the legislature starts up on that critical issue.
Very good. Other questions from our audience? Let's see. President Cindy Watts, President Campbell.
Let me just add that going into the legislative session, if state's question 744 should pass, our number one goal will be to deal with the budget starting out. And hopefully, as I can continue to build upon our economy, we'll have some revenue coming back into the state. Yes, ma'am. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for joining us. You briefly mentioned Oklahoma Promise, and it's something we're all very proud of. It is a national example in terms of college access scholarship programs. In recent years, the legislature has looked at various ways to restrict access to that program by increasing the college GPA or by increasing the family income status. Will you commit to keeping it as a college access program as opposed to limiting access through that program?
Well, I'll tell you what I'll commit to, and that is listening to you for your recommendations, because you're the ones out there working with the college students who are trying to get in, dealing with acceptance into our universities. And I've gone through that with my children. You know, I know there are certain grade points that you have to make, certain college or certain high school courses, I should say, that you have to have for college entrance. And so I will listen to you, and you tell me what we need to do to get more of our children into college and to make that program as effective as possible, and utilizing our resources, our limited resources, in the best way. So if you think that some of the things they've been talking about in the legislature will not fulfill those goals, then come and tell me. I want to hear from people who are involved in the system as to what works best.